Hello and happy Easter everyone. It is another marvellous Monday, and this week I'm going to be taking a look at the retro Marvel Legends Spider-Man vs Carnage 2-pack. So you might be asking yourself, what exactly about this set is retro? Well, the answer is that this is of course based on the Spider-Man the animated series from the 1990s. Over the last few years, Hasbro have been releasing Spider-Man themed action figures that have employed the old retro cards from the Toy Biz years back when they produced toys from the animated series. I've really enjoyed this nostalgic turn, and I've picked up a great many of these figures across the last few years because I love the design and the packaging, and it just takes me back to my childhood. But despite all this, most of those releases actually hadn't been distinctly from the animated series. In fact, there are a handful of characters such as Gwen Stacy who never made an appearance in the animated series at all, and the ones that did looked much more like their comic book counterparts than the animated versions. However, in recent years they've really started to lean more into this and started to design their costumes a little bit more reflective of what we saw in the animated series, and more recently have started to add the cell shading that we've seen in the X-Men animated series line. So this is the first 2-pack we've had from this retro line, and as we can see, they've employed the same design to the packaging, but of course this time it is in a plastic-free box. So it's actually surprisingly small and compact, I have to say. It's not very big at all. But the design is fun and colourful, and it's really nice to have this nice bespoke image here of Spider-Man versus Carnage in the traditional style. I think this looks really good. You can put this on display and it looks really fun and eye-catching and just very colourful, which I think is fantastic. Now, a quick thought though on the fact that we have Spider-Man in his alien costume, the black costume, and of course Carnage in his traditional colours. This seems like a really odd mix. I'm not quite sure why they put these two versions of these characters together, since this never happened in the animated series. I'm not sure this even happened in the comic books actually, where we've had Spider-Man in his black costume versus Carnage. If we look at the side panel, of course we can see the Spider-Man animated series branding there, which is very distinctive and looks very nice, and of course we see those two images of Spider-Man and Carnage once again. So yeah, if you want to put this on the shelf and have it facing this way, this looks pretty nice and attractive, but you can also flip this around because on the other side panel we have what is clearly trying to emulate the VHS sort of style packaging that we've seen very successfully with the X-Men line. Then on the reverse we have two photos of the actual figures themselves in action. Again, pretty consistent with what we used to see in the old Toy Biz style. So this looks really good, very fun. I really like how they've successfully recreated this sort of theme and vibe for the back of the packaging here. And of course an awful lot of this is given over to small text, but this is still pretty presentable and looks very fun. The packaging opens from the top, and straight away you'll notice there is a little bit of card there that's hiding one of the bits of accessories. There's some rice paper baggies which have some other accessories in there, and then we have these folded card columns which house the individual figures inside their rice paper. I'm not a huge fan of this approach, to be honest. They are a bit of a nightmare to get back into their boxes. First up we have the Symbiote Spider-Man, and of course you will immediately notice that he is benefiting from that new cell shading, and he looks all the better for it in my opinion. I don't think there's anything new with this sculpt because it was released just last year as part of the retro wave actually. As you can see, that did have a brand new body, it had improved articulation and posability, but this is simply a repaint of that figure. So if you liked that figure previously, you're probably going to really like this one. Of course, the key difference this time around is that he does have that blue cell shading, those individual blue lines on him, which accentuates the sort of shadow effect. I think this works really well, and it definitely is reminiscent of what we see in the animated series. So I think this is pretty successful. It's not just the blue lines. If you look at the spider symbol on his torso there, you'll also see there is some grey paint, some grey shadowing there as well, just to accentuate that. I think this looks really good. For me, this is actually a significant improvement over the comic book version, just because I've always really liked having those highlights, which we do see even in the comic book. So for me, this works really well, and I think is probably the best version of this figure to date. Articulation wise, he has a ball joint in his head, so of course he can spin his head all the way around, he can sort of lean it left and right, and of course he can nod it up and down as well. He's got a ball joint in the shoulder, so of course he can kick his arms up, but you'll also notice he has this wonderful butterfly joint just in the shoulder here as well, so he can also get his arms forwards and backwards for some of those crucial poses that you're going to want him in, which is absolutely fantastic. He has a bicep swivel, a double joint at the elbow, and a pin swivel at the wrist there, so that of course that wrist can rotate all the way around and it will hinge forwards and backwards as well. He has this fantastic ball joint in the upper torso. I love this. This works really, really well. He can move all the way around. He can lean left and right. And of course, he can even bend forwards and backwards. And there's even an extra ab crunch at the bottom of his abs there as well. So he can get a really good distance bending forwards and backwards, which is fantastic. Now there's ball joints in the hips, kicking his legs out to the side. There's an upper thigh swivel there as well, so you can rotate that upper leg all the way around. The legs will kick forwards, they'll go backwards a little bit, and there's another double joint at the knee, so that lower leg can kick all the way back there. There's also a swivel at the top of the boot cut there, and there is an ankle pivot, allowing that foot to lean left and right, hinge forwards and backwards, and then of course there is also toe articulation. When it comes to accessories, he's pretty light, unfortunately. He does just come with an extra 2 pairs of hands, 2 thwipping hands, and alternative closed fist and open hand. These are the exact same hands that the single carded release came with, and sadly there's no additional accessories here such as webs or anything like that. That would have been a really nice fun extra. Now, I definitely do take issue with the thwipping hands because, well, they're not really appropriate for this costume, and especially for the animated series where it's made very, very plain that the webs definitely shoot out the top of his backhand, so this just isn't very accurate. But that being said, I do think that this is a tremendous looking Spider-Man figure. For me, this probably has to be the definitive black suited alien costume version of this character in my collection so far. I love this improved articulation. This body mold works really, really well, and you can get him into all sorts of really cool, different Spider-Man-esque poses, which of course is entirely appropriate. So I think this just looks fantastic on display, no matter what you do with it really. The dimensions just look really spot on. There's definitely been a lot of Spider-Man figures across the years, but there's always been some that slightly niggled me, but this one is right up there as one of the very best in my opinion. So, moving on to Carnage, I think the first thing you'll notice about this version of the character is that he's very bright and colourful. And whilst we've had a number of different Carnages across the year, I think this is probably the closest we've ever come to the animated series version of the character. Certainly they've reused a lot of the elements of previous Carnage figures. This is the exact same head sculpt that we've seen in the past, and I will compare the two a little bit later. But this is solid stuff. This still looks pretty accurate to what we see on screen. The crucial thing with this version of Carnage is the design of the black markings on his chest and around his body. For the most part, this is pretty accurate. Now, the paint doesn't go quite far enough. If we look at the animated still cell, we can see obviously that those black lines go right across the chest, whereas these definitely stop at the top of the torso and don't quite go to the shoulders the way they should. But this is close enough, I think. The red plastic they've used is much brighter than previous releases, and as we can see, those black lines are a lot simpler, a lot less complex than previous Carnages that we've had in the Marvel Legends line, but a lot thicker and a lot more true to what we see in the animated series. In terms of the sculpting, most of these parts have been recycled from previous releases in this line. However, the torso is quite different, and that's because we have this extra butterfly wing joint at the top of the shoulder there to allow greater articulation. But other than that, the head, the hands, the legs, the feet are all recycled from the previous release. So, articulation-wise, there is a ball joint in the head that allows the head to spin all the way around. It can sort of wobble from side to side, and of course, it will also nod up and down. Now, there's a really helpful peg here that allows you to get a full range of motion from that neck joint, which is fantastic. Now, of course, there's a ball joint in the shoulder, so the arms will kick up and out, but as you'll notice, there is that fantastic butterfly wing joint there that is unique to this particular release of Carnage, which is fantastic. There's a complementary bicep swivel there, and there is a double joint at the elbow, allowing that lower arm to kick all the way back. There's a pin swivel at the wrist, so that hand will rotate all the way around, and of course it will hinge forwards and backwards as well. There's a straight swivel at the waist so the figure can move from side to side, and there's also a complementary ab crunch as well in that upper torso there that allows the figure to bend all the way forwards and backwards a pretty healthy distance. There's ball joints in the hips, of course the legs will kick out to the side, there's that upper thigh swivel that we come to know and love from the Marvel Legends line. The legs will kick forwards, they'll go backwards, and there is another double joint at the knees allowing that lower leg to kick all the way backwards there, and there is also that upper boot cut there in the mid-calf section that allows that swivel to go all the way around, which is great. And then finally there is an ankle rocker allowing that foot to hinge forwards and backwards, but also rock from side to side. Carnage fares a little bit better than Spider-Man when it comes to accessories because he comes with an alternate hand, some extra tendrils, an alternate hand that doubles as an axe edge, and an alternate Cletus Cassidy head. The tendrils are optional, and there's a peg hole in the centre of his back for you to just plug them in. And both the axe hand and the alternate head are really nice touches. Now I think we've seen both of these pieces before, so there's nothing really particularly new here to be honest, but these are nice extras if you didn't get them first or second time around. Here we have a quick comparison between two Carnage figures from the Marvel Legends line. On the left hand side we have the very first release from Hasbro, which of course is a classic comic book version of Carnage. This was Carnage taken from the Green Goblin Build-A-Figure wave, I believe. And on the right hand side of course we have this new release, so you can see some of the similarities and differences. For the most part this is the same figure. The key difference of course is the paint and the brightness of the plastic that's been used, but as you can see crucially there is also that added articulation in the shoulders, which is very different from the torso on the original release. So, all in all, a bit of a strange release this one. Despite the very obvious paint differences, there's not an awful lot that's new about either of these figures. Both these figures have been released independently in the past, and conceptually, bundling these two versions of these characters together doesn't make a whole lot of sense considering it's meant to be based on the animated series as a source material. And if you've bought either of these figures in the past, there's not an awful lot here to really tempt you into buying this new set. But that said, I'm still going to give it 4 stars, because I actually really like this pair of figures. I think this is a really nice pairing, and these figures are absolutely fantastic. Now, I actually didn't own this version of Spider-Man, so for me, this is a massive win because not only has it got the improved body mold and its superior articulation, but I also really like this cell shading. For me, this just takes it over the top, and I really love it. Just gives it a little bit extra oomph that I think the previous release was missing, in my opinion. So I think this is really very nice. The Carnage is probably the weaker of the two, but that being said, I think this is probably my preferred Carnage. I like the brighter colouring, I like that it has that added articulation in the top of the shoulders there, and all in all, it's pretty fun because it comes with all the Carnage accessories that you could possibly want. So for me, this does tick all the boxes, and I'm actually really glad to have it. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.